There's like some sort of poem, I will say, but I don't know its name.
It's dangerous.
Something to do with ATVs. I don't know.
Yeah.
Those two. But that was it.
Agreed.
But we always, we like to think they were really cool. And like old-timey people couldn't have been really cool. But then you see like, notes that people in like the 1800s were passing around here. It's like, there's its own version of what we do now. And we somehow invented humor in 100 years or something,
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, we're back up.
Oh.
One moment, everybody.
My lettuce.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for that little break. I know it was a little abrupt, but sometimes how it goes. So, so we are now continuing our discussion of the strategic plan and specifically items that we're looking at for this next year and those that were scheduled for this year that we haven't actually finished. Any other things somebody would like to highlight or discuss? Counselor Andrade?
Along the lines of what you had brought up before about the city-owned properties, I was just curious about the onboarding a developer for the project and preparing the site plan and building permit approvals. I'm curious if we have any more updates on that. Or, do we actually think we'll be able to progress that far for this fiscal year?
One of the tasks that I intend to give to the new Housing and Economic Development Committee is to start doing some outreach to some of the potential funding sources that were discussed with the meeting I had with held and the housing developers. So I don't know how quickly that will go.
That's cool. I was just curious because I misread and for whatever reason thought it was this fiscal year instead of next fiscal year.
No, it's okay.
That's why I was like, realistically, we'll be getting this done.
Bumped it out a little bit, so we have a little bit of time.
For the 1.2.1.2, 1.2.1.2, you might say. Contract for a branding campaign, including logo, image, that is budgeted at $400. How's that? Because I love that. I'm just
do a logo.
Okay.
We can do it, and this is worth the discussion. And maybe I thought we had this, but maybe it was an internal discussion.
One of you and I had talked about it.
We can do a branding campaign. I mean, there's companies out there, and you can spend $40,000 to $80,000 plus. We, the city of Philomath, could easily spend $80,000 for a branding campaign where consultants will come in, they'll interview this council, stakeholders, public meetings, survey online, and they will learn what is Philomath. And then they will take that information and they will develop a logo, tagline, colors, a font that reflects the sentiment that they got when they were reading through the survey results. You get a really thick book of all of the different ways that you can and can't change the font, the color scheme, the size of the inches of buffer around the logo, how it can be modified, how it can be modified, recommendations for how it should look on your newsletter, on your envelope, on your letterhead. And it's a great product. The jury, I think, is still out a little bit on whether those really benefit cities as far as economic development and placemaking and tourism, all those things, or if it just looks nice and makes people feel better about the place they live and help with community pride. There's arguments on both sides of the table. I've read those arguments quite a bit. So it's not a huge priority for me. What I think the city could use is updated or a new logo separate from the city seal, which we use by default as the city logo because we don't really have a city logo. We have the city seal, the emblem, which we use for official documents. We have, we use it in very official things, but it doesn't look great on a t-shirt or a ball cap, right? And it doesn't look great on a newsletter where you're trying to be a little more flashy. So what we're really looking for with the $400 would be to go out to a body of graphic designers and say, we like a new logo, here's some things we're interested in, and they all make the pitch and you pick one, they perfect it, and we get it in various different formats that we can utilize it. So that's what the $400 would pay for. Because I don't necessarily want to spend $80,000 right now on the bigger. Would be very, very cool, but it's expensive, and again, jury's still out on how beneficial that really is for a community.
Councilor Trotty?
Are we planning on, I think it would be nice if we advertised it to the community, and because I know we have plenty, or at least some talented graphic designers in our community. Might be able to come up with something.
Yeah.
To include them in the process, basically.
Yeah, and that's not a bad way to do it. I was looking at 3 different websites that offer the service. They already have a long list of graphic designers that sign up to be on that website, and they look for these requests to come in,
Okay.
and they choose which one to respond to, which ones not to respond to. It's a pretty streamlined process in that way. I hadn't really considered keeping it local and choosing a local graphic designer. I think maybe we limit ourselves a little bit with that because
I meant giving them the opportunity as well to
Yeah.
submit, not necessarily limiting it to
Yeah.
people in the community.
the way I've seen it work on the other platforms is you're going to get back and 2 to maybe a dozen different initial proposals, right? Pick me, here's an initial one. If you like it, I can hone it in a little bit more. So I think we could put a notification out there for this dollar amount. It wouldn't have to be a formal RFP, but we can definitely put a notice out that city's interested in doing a new logo. Here's the platform that we're going to use. If local graphic designers want to do something, here's how you need to submit it to be considered. I'm not opposed to that.
Good.
Yeah, I like that.
Councilor Moore?
Just one other thing on that, could we also, part of that, have an agreed upon city seal? Because it has always, and it's just maybe a pet peeve, it does always bother me that the city seal on here is different than the city seal up there, which is different than the city seal on the letterhead. I know they all have the same pieces. It's like Mary's Peak with the museum and a river and trees, and that's great. But just if we're gonna be having someone do it, it might be nice to have a de facto, this PNG is or this SVG or whatever is the city seal.
Yeah, and we've been working at that. I would say that we generally have inherited different versions.
Right.
over
No,
the
I'm
years.
sure. Yeah.
And Ruth will tell you I've tried to streamline that as much as I can, but every once in a while a document will pop up. Where did I get that? I thought we got rid of all
I'm not
those.
going to say anything.
Some people even have some preferences over my preferences, and they've had to not say anything and just go with what Chris's preference was to try to streamline it. And again, I'm with you. I don't care if it's this one or this one. Let's just pick one and do it. So I've picked one,
Okay.
and we've tried to push that one, but there's still some stuff that floats. For the most part, we try to use that one. I think is the closest one to the one that I try to utilize now as much as possible.
Okay.
And that's as of about maybe 2-3 years ago. I kind of started really pushing that.
Councilor Andrade?
So this wouldn't have a budgetary impact that I can think of, but I would like to add something to, I'm guessing it would be under goal 4.5, promote healthy and clean neighborhoods. We have a lot of objectives and actions surrounding preserving and protecting trees, but not necessarily about wetlands. We have the natural area language included in here, but I think it's really important that we call out wetlands as being important and in need of protection, and would like to add that as something either the planning commission or the parks advisory board, someone could, somebody could take a implement that.
Interested in what the rest of the council feels about that.
Trying to think of a property, so a private property owner has a wetland, and they have the legal right to mitigate it by going to a wetland mitigation bank. If the city has a property with a wetland,
Depends on the wetland. There's different qualities and quantities of wetlands, and every scenario is different, and there's always an opportunity cost associated with it. So, you know, I think when you talk to most planners throughout the state, when you're talking about 400 unit housing development over a farmer's field that qualifies as a wetland because it retains moisture throughout the winter, the verdict's still out. When you're talking about, you know, a paved asphalt driveway over top of a creek bed, there's a different scenario, right? But they're both considered wetlands by the state, and they're both equally protected by the state. So there's a lot of fluidity between just that term wetland isn't just what you think of like a marshland that's got this huge, great ecosystem. Sometimes a wetland is, you know, less than an eighth of an acre of area that's got some hydraulic soils to it and isn't connected to any other wetlands. It's literally a low spot in the Willamette Valley, which is wet for half of the year. So I'd be a little cautious about going too far one way or another, because I do think individual property owners view and value wetlands differently than others. And it's not whether they like or don't like wetlands, it's what do they want to do with their property, and is what they're doing with their property helping to maintain and preserve or enhance certain wetlands, but sometimes that's at the expense of other wetlands, and all of that gets regulated by the state.
Councilor Causey?
This may be a question for council, but if wetlands are protected by the state, is it really necessary or meaningful or useful for the city to also try to implement protection?
Only if we want to have protections up and above what the state does. And I think the state has very stringent requirements on preservation of wetlands currently.
Councilor Andrade?
So then clarifying question, like there have been some really, there have been areas in the city, and I'll say this isn't just from me, like I've spoken with other community members, it's been in surveys and stuff, things that we've gotten from the community, you know, valuing our wetlands are the naturally more like what you typically think of as a wetland that has communities of flora and fauna, and it's a priority to keep them, but we repeatedly have a lot of them built over. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is if there's a way that a conversation could be had by people to try to like narrow in on, how do I say that? I guess first of all, there's a way to kind of define this kind of wetland that we're talking about, so that we can avoid those like little puddles basically that are ephemeral or year round or whatever. But I guess the question is like, if wetlands are so protected by the state, then why is it that we have, you know, the Letman RV park and storage continue? Like, you know, like there was wetlands there. There was creek, and like the high school, I don't remember, but there were students who used to go out there like in their science class. Like how
Yeah, so there was a lot of misinformation surrounding that.
Okay,
Where the high school went out is actually east of the Letman property.
okay,
And that property is still not touched, and you can still go out there today and look at the turtle ponds and
okay.
what's there. So there was some misinformation there, so I don't.
Thank you for clarifying that.
But the Letman property did have some wetlands on there, but they mitigated those wetlands offsite. That's allowed by state law. They're also looking at doing a lot of enhancement of the creeks that are on the property and enhancing those wetlands. And so, again, all of that gets regulated by the state. I don't have anybody in-house that's an expert in wetlands. The property owner or the developer has to hire an environmental consultant to fill out that application. It goes to DSL, they're the experts in that, and they agree on what needs to be mitigated, what the values are, what doesn't need to be mitigated, what has to be preserved, what doesn't. From the city standpoint, I say I need a letter from DSL saying you're compliant with wetlands regulations for the state, and I don't have a whole lot more insight than that. And I don't have anybody on staff that can really give any more insight on that. And so I don't know how we would regulate anything more than what the state's doing to regulate them without having anybody on staff to do that or hiring a consultant every time somebody want to do something. So I value the wetlands as much as anybody does. And maybe that didn't come across properly when I started, because what I see is an overreach oftentimes on trying to preserve wetlands that I think are pretty low value, and it's at the expense of additional housing, it's at the expense of additional jobs. And that's a whole different conversation, but that's really a debate between the property owner and DSL. That's not really something that the city typically gets involved in, right? I'm gonna be a neutral party that says, submit the application, show me that you're compliant with the wetlands regulations from DSL and the Army Corps of Engineers. And then we're gonna process your application through the land use process. So the city kind of takes a little bit more of a neutral role there, and I think that's a healthy position for us to take. I mean, you're talking more generally speaking, should we protect wetlands? Well, we do. Every application comes in, if there's wetlands on the property, we require them to go through the proper channels and have it protected. State law is gonna require them to do it. So I don't know, I get what you're saying. There's not similar language to protect trees, which is why we're talking about language to protect trees within the urban growth boundary. So that one I agree with as well. We need to look at those provisions. I just think wetlands is a different issue that we don't really have jurisdiction or purview over. The state does that.
Counselor Causey.
If the city wanted to protect specific locations like the one Jessica and Councilor Andrade described, wouldn't the best way to do that be for us to purchase that land?
Yeah, we would want to purchase it, and we want to put some type of a easement on it or a deed restriction on it.
Councilor Moore.
Two things. I think, I've also, I guess, been a little confused with some of the feedback about the Letman property. I wasn't on the council when that went through, but I did grow up across the street from it, and I would walk my dog over there all the time. I don't know how I was supposed to do that, but I did. And yeah, I think just to reiterate, like the piece that is being built on used to just like before they started building on it, it was like a crumbling concrete pad, and like rusty metal sticking out of the ground and like a gravel field. And I'm not exaggerating when I say I think me and my friends shot like a little movie over there that was supposed to take place in like a dystopian failed society. So it's not like it was a beautiful it was a former industrial yard that had just been torn down and is now another industrial yard kind of. So the part that has like the beaver dams and all the wildlife and everything is the eastern half. I think the second thing that maybe we should consider in conjunction with a tree ordinance or something like that is just the idea had been brought to me of there are private landowners and homeowners that may have like really great spots for additional tree coverage in the city. And if the city is willing to sort of incentivize that or like offer, saplings or nursery trees or something and have, even as part of like our Arbor Day celebrations, if there's someone who's like, yeah, sure, I can plant a tree in my backyard. I'm just not going to go to Chenard's and buy a tree. If like Public Works or the city or something can help do that, I think that might be worth doing, where it's something where we can improve our tree cover and improve our natural environment, but it's more of a incentive than a disincentive. It's like something free as opposed to a penalty for doing something. I think that would be a good route to take maybe, and I don't think it would cost the city probably that much, but just wanted to note that because I think it'd be worth exploring.
Yeah, I think we give out at least 200 trees plus every year during our Arbor Day celebrations. All the fourth graders through the whole city take a tree home. That's a pretty, if every one of those got planted, I mean, that would
Yeah,
be pretty good, even if only half of them survived, you know, it's still a pretty good number.
yeah.
But what I hear you say is open it up to more of the community, not just the fourth graders.
Yeah, and I think the idea of it had come to me was more sort of like targeted, like using our GIS or something, like see are there areas in Philomath that have really low tree cover that like we could even go knock on their door and be like, hey, would you like to have a free tree? We have one in the truck, kind of a thing.
And we got a digger right here.
Right, yeah. I mean, maybe that's the situation. You do understand. Just it's sort of this like because I remember getting one of those trees in fourth grade, and I remember I like put it in a little pot and then it died. Which I learned a lot, but it did not add to the tree canopy in Philomath. And I think since we have all the GIS and satellite and everything, if there's some way that that we could utilize that to really highlight areas where that would be beneficial and do it a little more strategically. Yeah.
Shh, Jim's here.
Criminal justice related.
You can use free tools on ArcGIS online to look at the vegetation cover.
Yeah.
So give your infrared analysis real quick.
Okay. Awesome.
I think if you limited it to 5 and then made people apply, they'd be
I have 5 free tree certificates sitting on my desk. They've been there all year. We got them last year.
Oh,
And from Chevron,
well, we're cooking.
paid for by Pacific Power. So we've got 5.
Okay.
For 5 people to call my office.
All right. I'll drum up support.
What section was that under? Just on there, 436 is that where we're at? Right now we say in parks and streets, but we're talking about expanding this onto private property as well.
One thing in here that I do think would be worth, thought about for a number of years, I think it'd be worth exploring is what compensating to some level our elected officials might do. What kind of, what might that look like, and would it be beneficial for us to allow some folks who can't afford to stay home or can't afford to come in and have their child's care taken care of or whatever, what would allow them to participate in local governance? I thought about that for a while, like, I don't know, $20, $30 a meeting, like, I don't even know. But what would it cost, just thinking about something like that? Councilor Moore?
I would be interested in understanding what the barriers are. Because like I would be in favor of like, paying for childcare or transportation or something like that if it's a barrier. I think the thing I always struggle with just sort of like flat out compensation is we're never going to be able to pay people enough to quit their job or be part-time. So it's like we're paying people to do this, but that doesn't actually give them any more time or ability to do this. So just, I guess I struggle with that sometimes where it's like, yeah, if I can quit my job and do this full time, I will, but you're not going to pay me that much. So I still have to keep my full-time job. So I don't have any additional time to do this, but now I don't know. So I think I would just be curious to kind of think about it more because that's what I've always been a little. I think if there are specific barriers we can remove, I would like that, but sometimes the other, like just sort of flat out compensation when it's such a small amount, I'm like, not sure what it helps with.
And it's the kind of thing I was thinking that could go, to the inclusivity committee, could then go to finance and admin, like, kind of from one committee to the next to kind of explore the idea and the concept.
Yeah.
I think that's an awesome idea and that we should pursue it. Personally, I cannot afford to be on council, but I'm stubborn. so I'm here anyway. So I think personally, for someone in my position, any money helps. So I do think it is a thing that we should be talking about.
Do others agree? Do we not care?
I have a question.
So I think offering daycare is a great example of something that we could do, but then you have to have a place to offer the daycare at. And so we don't want the daycare like take out some seats back here and we'll have it here or, you know, in the other parts of City Hall, right? So then it becomes really complicated.
My idea was compensating them so they could get a babysitter at your house.
That's fine. I understand the desire behind it.
Yeah.
I just don't know if direct compensation is gonna create that effect unless you make it high enough that it then becomes a budget issue more than anything else.
Yeah.
So
And Chelsea?
I don't remember the name of it, but I was in a leadership session recently where they were talking about an organization that provides funding for like councils for childcare. So it's like an organization that does that. I can look into that. My other thing was I was going to ask Jim. Jim, is there a concern with compensating the volunteers, or how does that? I mean, I know that some other cities have do something.
Lots of cities do different things.
How do they do that?
Well, so I know of one city that in their charter, I think they pay every counselor $4.78 for every meeting they go to. Been that way since 1948 and it will continue forever. It's not uncommon for cities to have other kinds of things that they try to call a stipend or something like that, but it really does change a little bit. You're not exactly a volunteer anymore. You're employee. There are different rules for people who get paid. It seems to work out okay. It's important to talk to your insurer, the workers' comp. So there's a series of kind of cascading things with employment. And what I think Corvallis recently has started doing this, where you can opt in or opt out. And I think that one of the issues that comes up is, are there conflicts of interest over certain things where you are getting directly paid? Those can usually be worked out by arranging things to align with terms so that there is an election prior to somebody's vote to change their compensation or to get compensation. But it also changes some things, because even if you were to decline the stipend or pay, you had the opportunity for that, and that can change some of your decisions. And I had an interesting conversation with the Ethics Commission Executive Director about this particular issue, and it's there are lots of things there, and I think examining what all the barriers are is probably a really good idea. Or let's say burials or
For instance,
Dr. Cochran?
It seems like it would be more efficient, because we don't want to add to anybody's pay. Anyway, they may have to do taxes, that stuff. Anyway, is the library open on Monday nights, and could they rent the community room for a babysitter and open that as an available spot for?
Right.
I guess I feel like maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. Like I would just maybe like us to look at empirically, like what are the barriers? Because I know like this came up in the legislature where they always talk about increasing their pay, and so they sometimes make like an equity argument, but like there are studies showing that increasing legislative pay doesn't actually increase diversity in a legislature. There's other reasons you might want to do it, but I think that's just kind of what I'm wanting us to do is just like look at in other cities and in local areas, like what are the actual barriers to serving? If this is one of them, then I think we should look at it. But if it's, if childcare is the main thing, we should look at that. If transportation is the main thing, we should look at that. But I think I just sometimes get frustrated with it's like we all just kind of collectively agree, like, oh, this is probably a barrier, and we haven't actually checked if it is. So I think that would be my hope. And I know we have a lot on our plate, so this could be, next fall or whenever we have time of just like doing a little more digging in on like what are the barriers to service, and would doing this actually help with that, or would it just be paying us more and nothing changes?
We
Because
did a 2-hour change for daylight savings times, that'd give us 2 hours extra every day, and that would save me more time.
there you go.
There you
And
go.
that would solve it. Councilman Andrade.
I think it was, what is it?
Yes, it is.
I just forwarded you the email that I had received a while back on it.
Yes, that is it.
And maybe that's something we can put on the website or something, because it's not only for, people participating in the meetings, it's also for community members.
So it's 10 till, and we'd love to take a break. Anything else we'd like to discuss?
Is that something you want to look at, 24, 25?
I just, whatever year works.
Okay. I'm gonna add as an objective under goal 1.2. I'll just add as identify barriers to show on the city council and consider resolutions or solutions, kind of broad. Kick it to finance admin committee some point next year and look at it.
Okay, well, if I don't see anybody else raising their hands, go ahead and just take a break until 7 o'clock. And thank you very much for the conversation. Adjourned.